From the LA Times studio, I am Sarah Rodman, host of The Real, your source for all things entertainment. And we are here today to talk about the nominations for Best Director at the Academy Awards. I am joined by esteemed film critic Justin Chang. Say hello to the people, Justin.
Hello, everyone.
And esteemed award show reporter Glenn Whipp. Say hello, Glenn.
Hello.
And these are our nominees, gentlemen. They are Guillermo del Toro for The Shape of Water.
Security. Who's security? Get them out. Tell me move the cylinder into the compressor.
Christopher Nolan for Dunkirk.
No, we're going to England.
We have to go to Dunkirk first.
Look at it. If we go there, we'll die.
Jordan Peele for Get Out.
Sir, can I see your license, please?
Wait, why?
Yeah, I have state ID.
No. He wasn't driving.
I didn't ask who was driving. I asked to see his ID.
Yeah, why? That doesn't make any sense.
Here.
You don't have to give him your ID because you haven't done anything wrong.
Maybe, baby, it's okay.
Paul Thomas Anderson for Phantom Thread.
No, don't turn it on me. I don't want your cloud on my head.
Shut up,
Oh, no,
Sarah.
you can shut right up. Don't pick a fight with me. You certainly won't come out alive.
And Greta Gerwig for Lady Bird.
I want to go where culture is, like
how in
New
the world
York,
did I raise such a
or at least
snob?
Connecticut or New Hampshire, where writers live in the
Get
woods.
into those schools anyway.
Mom,
So, my first question is overall impression of the group of people that have been nominated here. Who's missing, I guess?
I
is
think
the
it's
question.
an excellent group. I think there are some great directors who are missing here, but my favorites are Luca Guadagnino for Call Me By Your Name and Sean Baker for The Florida Project, and I could name others too. But I think it speaks very well of this year that I can't really fault any of the five that they chose. And in fact, I'm a fan of most of them. So I think it's a really terrific group. I don't think there's anyone here who I would say doesn't deserve to be here.
Glenn, do you agree?
I agree. I mean, on Oscar morning, I'm busy writing and getting things together, but I did take a moment, I remember, to tweet out just how pleased I was with this group of five nominees for director. I mean, there's always going to be your favorite that's missing. Sean Baker for The Florida Project was mine. But this is a great group of nominees. And I was more excited by who was in, Paul Thomas Anderson. I did not expect that. He got his second Oscar nomination, first since There Will Be Blood. And Greta Gerwig and Jordan Peele, No Sure Things. It's a good group just in terms of talent, in terms of the merit, and in terms of kind of the types of movies that they directed. It's a really interesting batch of films.
And mentioning talent and merit is great because I think that a lot of times you see a group like this and you're cheered also on a separate level because we have a woman, we have a couple of people of color. So from a diversity standpoint, it's representative, which is nice, but these people are in here because of the films that they directed were so good that they deserved to be in here. So can you take cheer in that there's some diversity among the group?
Absolutely. With Greta Gerwig as a woman, Jordan Peele as a black man, Guillermo del Toro, a Mexican director. So I'm glad that I haven't heard too much naysaying or snippiness about any of these three directors being here only because, as a token kind of nomination or token citation. Well, I think Guillermo del Toro is completely separate from that because he's been just a beloved Hollywood director for years to the point where some people have to actually remember, oh, he's Mexican born. So it's like, I think that is certainly in his case. And maybe I've heard a little bit with regard to Lady Bird flows and cuts together so seamlessly. It's very easy to overlook, I think, how hard and how difficult it is for Greta Gerwig to achieve, what she achieved in that film.
Yeah, I agree. But when you write about these nominations, you have to include the fact that, Greta Gerwig, the fifth woman in the history of the Academy Awards, 90 years, 5 women nominated for director. Jordan Peele, fifth black man to be nominated for director. No black women yet.
And no black man has ever won Best Director
Right.
yet.
So these are important stings because it matters.
I think Del Toro's going to win for a film that is, not in any way, it doesn't feel like this film has a Mexican identity, I wouldn't say, but it's, in fact, it's very much about diversity and representation in a broad sense. That's very different to me in an interesting way if we talk about Greta Gerwig, who's made a film that is very, and this really became clear to me watching Lady Bird a second time, just how carefully she put that together, how she maintains tonal control through that whole thing, the way the movie seems to be rushing its way through and yet also being a very contemplative kind of thing. There are things that I don't think that this is a token nomination at all. I don't think it's a good job Greta nomination at all. I really think that this is her first, technically her second, I guess, if you count Nights and Weekends, the film she co-directed with Joe Swanberg years ago, but her solo directing debut. I think she shows she had some major chops, and the fact that she chose to tell a very kind of personal and intimate story is just almost, I don't think it's incidental, but I think that she made a very, very big movie, very big in its emotions and very big in its effects. So, and that said, I would be equally happy if Nolan won or if Greta Gerwig won, if Paul Thomas Anderson won. I think Phantom Thread is one of the most exquisitely directed movies of this year, and if Jordan Peele won too.
So you'd be happy with anybody. And I do think there's something to be said about the drama of getting exactly right, a tight shot on a face reflecting an emotion, as opposed to the sort of dazzlement of a wide shot of thousands of people, that the composition is beautiful, but it may not necessarily be saying something in that moment, that it looks beautiful.
Absolutely. And this comes down to, I think we're talking about this all kind of respecting these movies in a more or less equal way. But for some people, Dunkirk just didn't work for them, and they're going to and Lady Bird did, or vice versa, whatever. So it's they will sometimes just go for what they like.
But yeah, going back to what you were saying too, it does look like it's Del Toro's award to lose, because the Academy usually follows the Directors Guild, and it's we've talked about how we like this group of directors, but we probably like Del Toro the least, do you agree with me on that too? I do, because I like those other four
better
movies so much, and in different ways, and as entertaining and interesting and involving as Shape of Water is, there are moments that are a little bit forced to me. And
I agree. I see this. Guillermo del Toro made Pan's Labyrinth, so to me, it's like, give me, it's like, I don't mind him winning this. It's like, I think he should have been nominated and maybe even won that year for that film, which I think is, his masterpiece to date. The Shape of Water is a movie that I admire enormously. I totally understand why people love it and are responding to it so much. It's a movie I admired more than I loved, and in fact, even as I was watching it for the first time and even more on the second, was sort of willing myself to try to like more than I really did. And yet there are so many reasons why, so many good examples of good direction in that film. The direction of the actors, which I think is maybe the most impressive thing about it. Sally Hawkins and Octavia Spencer and Richard Jenkins, and maybe to a lesser degree Michael Shannon, who I think is just, verging on self-parody at this point.
And Doug Jones, let us not forget Doug Jones.
Doug Jones, absolutely. How could you not forget his, who is Del Toro's true muse in some ways. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I know that Mark Olson had an opportunity to talk to Guillermo del Toro sort of about his approach over the years, and I thought maybe we could take a little listen to that.
Guillermo, do you also enjoy the sort of the collaborative nature of filmmaking, having your creative team with you?
Yeah, I think that you prepare excruciatingly for everything in order to be able to improvise, and to find solutions that were different, that you didn't know. And you only do this with age. I know this sounds, there's sort of a paradox when you direct. When you're young, sort of arrogance is more than experience. And then as you work, experience takes the place of arrogance, if you're lucky and if you're a good person, and eventually experience is a much more genuine substance than the arrogance you have. And the more you relinquish, the more is yours in a strange way.
So another person that I think that people think of in your words, Justin, what you were just saying about wedding emotion and technicality is Paul Thomas Anderson in general in his career, and certainly in this film. Although I feel like people are talking about Phantom Thread, but the response from the people who have seen it and from the critics has been that, again, here's a very meticulous work from him.
He's always meticulous. I mean, just I think from the minute he made Hard Eight, everyone realized, okay, this guy is a born filmmaker, and every film since then has just borne that out. And it's interesting to me how he has gone from these kind of grand epics like Boogie Nights and Magnolia in a more interior direction with films like The Master and Inherent Vice and now Phantom Thread, while being just as meticulous, just as exquisite in kind of his, I love, maybe 4 of these 5 directors almost equally, I would say. But if part of me is really rooting for Paul Thomas Anderson, and I think that the industry does too. I mean, I was just as surprised as Glenn was, and I think a lot of people were when PTA got nominated and it was so heartening. And I think that shows enormous respect on the part of the industry. He was, they love There Will Be Blood, and he's been nominated for screenplay any number of times. So I think that he has the kind of good faith support of the industry. And just the kind of cultural cachet that Phantom Thread has had over the past, I think even in recent weeks, is really wonderful. I think and it bears out my mind, it bears out my feeling that movie is a real audience movie, which I don't think you could necessarily say about The Master or Inherent Vice or even, I think There Will Be Blood is too an audience movie, but Phantom Thread is this terrific dark comedy. It's tonally weird. It's also this, beautiful throwback to sort of vintage Hollywood romance and romantic melodrama. You feel taken into another world that has been designed from top to bottom, from the inside out. The Mark Bridges costumes, that production design, it creates this world that you just want to spend time in. I could have watched a movie about people just making clothes and making dresses for 2 hours, and
scored by Johnny Greenwood.
Scored by Johnny Greenwood. I mean, that score is just like being made love to in a theater, just listening to that score for 2 hours. And so so even if the movie were not as compelling and well acted as it is, and it gives you this, really interesting story on top of that. So I can't say enough good things about Phantom Thread. And I am so, I don't think Anderson is going to win the directing Oscar, but the fact that movie is catching on, it's one of the most quotable movies of the year. People are using the one-liners, people are making, people just made Valentine's Day, Phantom Thread grams with quotes from the movie. I just think it's awesome.
Yeah, I was out, I spent a couple hours with him last week, and in the kitchen of the home that they've been using as a post-production facility, they have asparagus quotes up on where they keep the dishes. Yes. I was telling him that this is his Etsy movie, and he was saying, yeah, Wes Anderson has all of his. Right. It's about time I have one of my own,
Expand the Anderson aesthetic.
And he was so happy about those 6 nominations. Yeah. In his younger days, he was kind of the, brazen, angry young man a little bit, and too cool for school. Kind of Oscars, I'll just sure. But no, he was like, no, these are important. I'm thankful and grateful, and I'm going to take a moment and enjoy the fact that it was nominated. He told me a story of the Oscar nominations morning when he was he got the call, and his 4 kids came to the breakfast table, and he was pouring them cereal, and he said, guess what movie got 6 Oscar nominations? Wow. And there was this pause, and then his youngest said, "Can I have a spoon?" And it's going, yeah, that's how they actually should have reacted. I spent all this time telling them awards don't matter. You do things because you love them. So, and here's Daddy bragging about his 6 Oscar nominations, but he was really pleased about them.
I think if he does win, too, one of the side benefits we will be treated to a fantastic Maya Rudolph reaction shot, right? So yes. This is one reason to be rooting for PTA. So, and on that note, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back.
In Pixar's Coco, young Miguel dreams of becoming an accomplished musician despite his family's generations-old ban on music. Desperate to prove his talent, Miguel finds himself in the stunning and colorful land of the dead. After meeting a charming trickster named Hector, the two new friends embark on an extraordinary journey to unlock the real story behind Miguel's family history.
This isn't a dream then. You're all really out there.
You thought we weren't?
Well, I don't know. I thought it might have been one of those made-up things that adults tell kids, like vitamins.
Miguel, vitamins are a real thing.
Well, now I'm thinking maybe they could be.
Pre-order Coco on iTunes Movies.
And now I want to talk a little bit about Jordan Peele. We've talked previously about some of the achievements that he had made in the film, but I think it's really interesting just from a cheerfulness standpoint that this man, like one of the last movies he just made was Keanu. And I'm not sure that a lot of people really knew that he had this in him ahead of time. Do you feel like there was a sense of surprise with this?
I think there's a sense of surprise with him. This is something he's wanted to do since he was 13 years old. And to reach this point where he's doing something he always wanted to do, and I think he always knew he wanted to do, but he didn't have quite the courage to do it until he was like halfway through writing Get Out. He phoned the producer and said, I want to direct this too. I think I'm the only person who could do this. Yeah. And then they hung up, and 10 minutes later, the producer called back and said, I think you're right. I think you are the only person who could do this. And you talk to him, he's got dozens of ideas.
When I sat down with him for Q&A, it was actually at the AFI Fest. There was an anniversary screening of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which of course is, one of the cinematic foundations and touchstones for Get Out. And he spoke about that film with so much, that film looks kind of, a little retrograde now, perhaps in some of its very well-meaning, politics or whatnot. But he spoke about it with great affection and with the sense I think everyone in that room got, which is that he had been sitting with this movie and sitting with the ideas of this movie for so long. And kind of like Greta Gerwig, I think, I think the interesting story about both Gerwig and Peele is that they were people who had proven how talented they were before they turned their attention to directing. I mean, as actors and as writers, we knew that they were, they had established themselves. And then this is what I really want to do, or maybe not really want to do, but in Gerwig's case, I don't know. In Peele's case, I think you're right, Glenn. It's like this is he's already rolled out. He wants to do more social thrillers, like a whole a series worth of them, and you hope that they'll be as good as Get Out. Maybe not all of them will be, but he clearly has the talent to pull it off. And so
and it's exciting when somebody is that talented and they say, maybe not this is what I want to do really, but this is what I want to do additionally. And I think because we have that bias sometimes, or there are people who have the bias sometimes, that we don't take comedy as seriously as we take drama, that adds an extra layer of surprise for some people coming to it, that like, here is,
right.
this goofy guy doing these sketch shows. Oh my goodness. But you forget that those sketch shows require great precision and great intelligence and great forethought. And so it shouldn't be that much of a surprise that you would bring that to bear on something like this.
It shouldn't be that much of a surprise. I think you're absolutely right, Sarah. It's like, it's very, and I think the same thing applies for Greta Gerwig. It's like, oh, here's this kind of mumblecore goofy actress who is so endearing in her movies. And whoa, she just made this, this movie that is very funny, but that is also very emotional. It's like, and in a way, there maybe is maybe a hint of condescension in that, perhaps, although who minds that if it means an Oscar nomination for Best Director. Right. But we're reminded, too, that there are a lot of great directors who have never won or even been nominated for this, and yet they've loved giving it, I think, to actors turned directors, whether it's Ron Howard or Robert Redford. It's like, I think sometimes Kevin Costner, yeah. And I think that both, I would put Gerwig and Peele above any of those achievements personally, just thinking back on them. But I think it's interesting. They sometimes tend to reward, okay, you've made it good already, and in this respect, and you look what you can do. You're like, you're a juggler. You can do all this, and so here you go. I'm not saying that's the only dynamic and effect here. I think that I think both those directors really earned it, but there does seem to be sort of that, first, and it also kind of reinforces the idea of the Academy as, the Academy Awards is something of a popularity contest because they both are people who are known already. And so now it's like, here we can cheer you on as you open up this other avenue of your career, as opposed to someone else who's maybe more of a career director. I mean, I think really quickly I want to talk about Dee Rees for Mudbound, a woman of color who I think impressed a lot of people with, myself included, with just this really ambitious, very kind of politically daring and narratively and structurally daring movie that maybe just in the midst of this very, very competitive year got a little bit overlooked, despite Mudbound receiving 4 nominations, but, not for, including adapted screenplay for her.
So she maybe is a name that you would have liked to have seen in there.
I would have liked to see her in the mix. Part of me was almost wondering, like, before the nominations were announced, the director's category, the director's branch, give them credit. They throw some, they throw some interesting names into the mix sometimes. Lenny Abramson for Room or something, or like
Ben Zeitlin.
Ben Zeitlin for Beasts of the Southern Wild, and Michael Haneke for Amour that same year over people they were expecting to get in, like Catherine Bigelow and Ben Affleck. So I really am a fan of this branch. They'll throw in foreign directors. They'll throw in Pedro Almodovar for Talk to Her. It's like, so I was kind of thinking, Dee Rees might get in, and who knew? But if any, that didn't happen. But maybe in the future, I hope there are Oscar nominations for her in the future. She's a great director.
And I like that idea. Just backing up a little bit, because things like Ordinary People and movies like that are coming to mind when the actor makes the leap to directing. And I feel like maybe back then it was even more surprising, but now it is less so. And that somebody like Jordan Peele, it is about merit, it is about talent, it isn't just about, hey, you can do that too.
Everyone's a multi-hyphenate these days, kind of, yeah.
I would say for both of them, having spent time with both of them, they're two of the most well-read people I know. They are voracious readers. They're also voracious film lovers. They watch movies. Jordan knows the genre and the genre rules backward and forward, and he studied them. And it goes back again to somebody I was talking about who's wanted to do this, who's thought about doing this for a while. He put in his time. He's thought about it. He knows. He knew it all. He knew all the rules. He knew what he wanted to do. And then he filters it through his own voice, through his own vision. Greta Gerwig did that too. And it's kind of a cool lesson, I think, for young filmmakers to take away from that is to, and we get asked that a lot, how do you become a writer? Well, you read. You read and then you write. But you start. And for filmmakers, you watch and you read.
Yes, you take your notes. And I know that Mark also had an opportunity to talk to Jordan Peele, so we are going to listen to a little bit of that also.
Directing feels like you're like pirate captain, and you have everybody's trusting you, and everybody's putting forth their best work. And I mean, film for that reason, it's I think the best form of story because you get, it's a collaboration. And everybody's working with the whole idea of painting this perspective and allowing the audience to see through someone else's eyes. Mm-hmm. So that's, with Get Out, it was, I've never seen these fears that I have as a Black man on screen.
So one person we have not talked too extensively about yet, other than the technical achievement that he got in Dunkirk, is Christopher Nolan, who has been in this category previously, yes?
No.
This is his first time?
It's
first
shocking
nomination.
To a lot of people, I think.
That is shocking to me. He has made some provocative, interesting, well-seen films.
I mean, I think I love that Christopher Nolan's nominated for Dunkirk, and I do think it's long overdue. I remember... Glenn, am I right? I think he got a Directors Guild nomination for Memento. I believe he did, which was like his second feature back in 2001. Don't quote, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure.
You're taking me too far back on DGA.
And that's a memory issue there.
He's someone whose career I followed very intently, and I think that the fact even that they expanded the Best Picture category because everyone in the Academy realized that they'd really dropped the ball by not nominating The Dark Knight that year for picture or for director, for that matter. Everyone thought he deserved it. I mean, he is someone who we talk about, you know, the blockbuster directors who kind of, whether they do or don't get in. And I think everyone feels that if anyone has sort of elevated the blockbuster, it's Christopher Nolan, and or even with films that are not Batman movies, like Inception, which was, you know, won a lot of Oscars but was not nominated for Best Director. I'm a huge fan of Interstellar, which I know is divisive. I really love. And it's
Let's spend the next half an hour talking about that. Interstellar, everyone.
That's another episode unto itself. But
that's what the next podcast will be about: debating Interstellar.
Well, and with Dunkirk, you know, which not even my favorite of his films by a long shot, but although I admired it enormously, it's interesting how this is a movie that I think is both classical and radical in the same, you know, classical maybe even more just in its subject matter. I mean, the joke goes that if you make a World War II epic, you know, and it's well received, you know, the Academy would respond to that. But this is something, of course, that he has done in his own pretty inimitable way in terms of just the structure of that movie, the play with time and with narrative, the sense. It's almost like classical avant-garde to me, the way he doesn't really bring you into identification with his characters in a conventional way, which might, you know, for some I think leaves them a little cold because like where's the emotion in this movie? And it's like I love that though, because I think to me it's very existential kind of filmmaking, you know, where it's not just steering you through this narrative, it's like plunging you right into what's it like to be a soldier on the beaches of Dunkirk. So technical achievements, and we could talk, it's just you watch the movie, it's like you come out and you feel like you've been transported. I think it's just so I'm very happy that he's here, and another reason why maybe I wish Del Toro were not monopolizing these awards beforehand, because I do prefer Dunkirk as a film, and I think as a technical achievement and as an emotional one, I think it's superior for me. So I wish that Nolan were being, you know, Nolan though is not he is not the cuddly beloved figure that Del Toro is on the award circuit, and that's for sure.
He's like the polar opposite. He is
frigidly polar.
Well, it's interesting because for someone whose movies have grossed more than $5 billion, that's a lot of popularity, but he's still something of a divisive figure within the industry. When Dunkirk screened for the Academy back in the summer, I wrote about it. You know, it screened at the Goldwyn Theater, 1,000 seats, and it was full to capacity, and got a pretty strong response. And I wrote about that, and then I had so many Academy members email me saying, "No, we didn't like that movie. You gave it too much praise. We found it, you know, the criticisms where it was a bit cold. We couldn't identify with the characters. There were no individual characters to latch onto." Justin's rolling his eyes, but I'm just reporting. I'm just delivering the news here.
He is not saying that is his
Hans Zimmer's score is still ringing in my ears. The structure of it, I've had enough of these Nolan puzzle movies with his fractured time
this is why
structures.
I can't wait for this wing of the Academy to die off, so that we can bring in some.
I don't know that this is I don't know that this is a generational thing. I think this is. I heard this from young and old.
From the Harry Styles fans and the Kenneth Branagh fans.
The Harry Styles fans wanted, you know, why didn't he break into song? No, I didn't get that email, but
Dunkirk with an exclamation point.
Dunkirk,
but yeah, but like I say, you know, for someone who's so popular, he remains something, and that's it's his first nomination as a director, and even before the Oscar nominations were announced, and you kind of figured this is the kind of movie that certainly would merit his first nomination. There was a lot of hand-wringing over at Warner Brothers whether it was actually going to come true or not.
Well, I think, too, and a lot of people will laugh at this and roll their eyes as well, but, you know, a director that Nolan is often compared to is Stanley Kubrick. And, you know, I think that a lot of people probably would take issue with the idea that he deserves to be in that pantheon with Kubrick, but I think he's the closest thing we have to a director like that, who is sort of, you know, you could actually say maybe Anderson is one of them too, but I think in terms of working in that sort of rarefied sphere where it's you know, he's he's a popular filmmaker, but there is this he is sometimes characterized as cold, as maybe caring more about the technique per se than the actors or an emotional experience. And for me, I just say, like, why is that a bad thing? Why do we fetishize and idealize, characters who are identifiable? Why do we, heap so much praise on movies that pull you in? It's like, why do we make excuses for our own laziness as moviegoers, frankly? I mean, I think of moviegoing as an active experience. Glenn, I know you do too. I'm sort of, preaching to the choir here, because, I just think that a lot of moviegoers, and I think a lot of Academy voters, want to be spoon-fed. And and I think that this does explain or account for at least why Nolan has taken so long to enter this nominees circle. It's interesting because I remember the year of Inception, which I think won like 4 or 5 or 6 Oscars. And so Nolan's name was the most repeated of that night. Everyone's just like, thank you, Christopher Nolan, but very conspicuously not nominated for Best Director. So that kind of sums up the polarization right there, almost. Like, he's hugely respected, and yet, he's never going to be everyone's favorite, of course, which is a good thing, I think.
I think that's the best thing. I mean, because then you have people talking about you, right? And so now it is time to make your predictions, gentlemen. Who do you think will win, and who would you like to see win?
Guillermo del Toro, the Academy clearly likes him. He's won numerous awards, including the Directors Guild Award. So he's definitely the odds-on favorite to win this. As we've talked about, I love these nominees. It's hard to choose who I would like to see. I would kind of like to see Paul Thomas Anderson, because it would just blow his mind. The reaction shot would be awesome. Christopher Nolan, for the same reason, because he is kind of reserved, this sort of stiff upper lip Brit. If his name was called, would that? What would his face be? I'd love to see that. I think you would get that just rare burst of emotion, and apart from the reserve that we typically see him. So, but then, God, Greta Gerwig or Jordan Peele. It's really hard for me to choose among those 4. Love them all.
All right.
I'm kind of right there with Glenn. I think Del Toro has this pretty much in the bag, is as close to a sure thing as anyone on Oscar night. I sort of have this sort of tie in my head between Nolan and Paul Thomas Anderson, the 2 white guys. Yeah,
Interesting.
I'm so unwoke in my directing choices, although I'd love to see Greta Gerwig too, and Jordan Peele, I think are both very deserving. But I like Phantom Thread better as a film than Dunkirk, but and so I would, just to break the tie, I'll go with Paul Thomas Anderson for Phantom Thread, but Nolan winning would not make me unhappy by any stretch.
So much love in the room for all of the people. We're just so democratic. All right. Well, we are closing up shop for the day. Thank you so much for listening. Justin, tell the people where they can find you on the Twitter.
You can find me at Justin C. Chang.
And Glenn?
I'm at Glenn Whipp.
That's 2 P's, ladies and gentlemen, WHIPP. That is a wrap on this episode of the pod. Thank you so much for listening. And please go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your favorite listening and download the show and rate and review us. Engage, people. Thank you so much. And until next time, I'm Sarah Rodman.
To get these and many other award-nominated films, go to itunes.com/Oscars.